What's up, everybody? So today we are in the second uh, episode or video of the apologetic series, and today we're going to be talking about does God exist? That's the first thing we're going to be looking at. We're going to do several videos on this topic of arguing for the existence of God. Um, and I think just the thing I want to say, sort of like in introduction, is the reason I'm doing this is because there's a lot of worthwhile things to talk about right now. A lot of things going on, and we'll probably get to some of those things in a future time. But right now, I wanted to do this because I've mentioned this before, but there was a friend of mine who I was talking to, and he said that he wasn't, really certain if God existed. He kind of seemed like he wanted to believe, but just wasn't really sure. And he said he didn't want to believe something. He didn't want to say he believed something if he really didn't. And I agree with that. I don't think you should say you believe something if you really don't. So I wanted to make these videos sort of as a resource, not just for him, but for anybody who's kind of struggling with that question. And if you're new to this channel, here we talk about theology and apologetics, which is what we're going to be doing for a good amount of time now, and just kind of things about Christianity in general, as well as things going on in the culture that I think are important to point out, and things of that nature. Um, so let's go ahead and get into the main thing. So the main thing is the question I've already said: does God exist? And there's the first argument I would like to present is called, it has several names, but we can call it the cosmological argument for God. And it kind of goes like this: because anything exists, there must be a God who brought it into existence. Is sort of the idea. Without God, nothing would exist. Um, God can exist without the universe, but not vice versa. The universe cannot exist without God. And here I'm just presenting the argument. I'm not arguing for it, I'm just presenting it. And this argument tries to show that the universe is not a necessary being, and therefore it can't account for its own existence. Um, the main point is that the universe was caused by some agent that is not a part of said universe. And the universe was not caused by itself. And there's three basic versions of this argument that they're not opposed to each other, but they kind of overlap and give sort of different dimensions of the argument. And they're the Kalam, the Thomist, and the Leibnizian arguments. And the first one we're going to look at is the Kalam cosmological argument. Now, this was first formulated by Christian philosophers, but it didn't really gain its full force until medieval Muslim thinkers. They were really the ones that kind of really gave it its power. And of course, Kalam is Arabic for talk or speech, but it means much more. Um, and this kind of has to do with, I'm going to try to keep this as simple as I can, but some of these things, we're talking about does God exist? So some of these things are going to get in really high, lofty ideas, but try to keep it as simple as I can. But there's two kinds of infinites. There are potential or abstract infinites, or there are actual or concrete infinites. So potential and actual infinites. And the Kalam cosmological argument, it takes what we know about these infinite series of numbers and it uses that knowledge to demonstrate that the universe must have had a beginning. So potential infinites are a set of numbers that continually increase by adding another number to the series. So an example of this would be like a stopwatch. Like if you clip a stopwatch and this, it's going and it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going, and you think well, it could potentially go on forever. But potential infinites are not actually infinite. It is a finite set of numbers to which another increment is added. It will never reach a point of infinity, no matter how long it goes, because you just keep adding a number. So that's not an actual infinite. It can't really be described that way. But actual infinites are sets of numbers to which no increment can be added. So it's a little different. And this is a little difficult to think about. And if you have trouble thinking about and imagining this, is because actual infinites can't and don't exist. If they did, we would see just really absurd things, and there'd be effects which it would not make life possible. And let me give you an example of what I mean about this actual infinite. So let's say you have a CD collection that's infinitely large, and each CD had an infinite number of songs. Okay? So if you listened to one CD, you hear as much music as if you had listened to all of the CDs. An infinite amount. Yet they're different sizes. And of course, that's nonsensical. That doesn't make any sense. Further, let's say you only had Bach and the Beatles in your collection, and that every other CD was the Beatles. That means you would have as many Beatles as you would Bach and Beatles combined. And they would both be infinite, but at the same time, they'd be different sizes. And you can ask questions. Would they be even or odd? The main point of this is to say that this is irrational. Actual infinites existing is irrational. Another example to give is, let's say a race car driver is making circuits along a track that's a mile long, and his son is on a tricycle going in circles. The son completes a dozen or so circuits to his dad's one. But if they had each been going for an infinite amount of time, they would have completed an equal number of circuits, which of course doesn't make any sense. And if this is confusing, this means that you understand that actual infinites don't exist in the physical world. If x equals y, then x cannot be 12 times greater than y. That's really important to realize. You wouldn't want to cross a bridge or ride in a car or live in a house made by an engineer who didn't understand the absurdness of actual infinites. Another demonstration of non-existence of actual infinites is time and causality. Time is not infinite because there is a now. And I guess an example of this would be sort of like a train station. Like you have a train that goes infinitely long. Well, how would you ever reach the destination? And you couldn't. That would be impossible. So just as potential infinites can become infinite, or can't become infinite, actual infinites could never reach the end of their infiniteness and turn finite. Therefore, time had a beginning. Time didn't spring itself into existence. Something had to initiate it. Then this is where causality comes in. So, and the simple way to understand this is just effects have a cause. You are an effect of a biological process of your parents. The current state of the universe is a cause of various astronomical and physical conditions. And each of these are causes also, or each of these causes are also effects. Your parents are not just your cause, but they are also effects of their parents, and so on and so forth. But because of the non-existence of actual infinites, the chain of causes, it can't go on forever. There must be a cause that is not an effect. Since the universe is an effect, then it must have a cause. And the Kalam argument shows that the universe had a beginning and was caused by an uncaused cause. And here you only have two options for this. Was the cause personal or impersonal? And reflection on this leads to a conclusion rather quickly, I think, and it's pretty obvious. So the first cause would have the ability to create. Without this, nothing could be created. It would also require an intention or will to create. It would also be a non-contingent being, which just means its existence doesn't depend on anything but itself. If it was contingent, then it would just be one more link in the chain of cause and effects. It must be transcendent. It must be outside and apart from the universe. Okay, so what kind of thing is this? It relies on nothing for its existence. It has the power to create something from nothing, has a will to do it or not to do it, and has the characteristics of existing outside of the creation. So this is personal. The Kalam argument proves that the universe had a beginning and that it was caused by a personal, powerful, transcendent being. Now, let me talk about something here that maybe people would object to and say, well, don't, Christians and, religious people talk about God being infinite? Well, if infinites don't exist, then how can we say God is infinite? So the infinites of God, when we say God is, infinitely loving or is infinitely merciful or whatever, those are meant to be more metaphorical in the idea that's being presented. It speaks more to the quality of his character, not to the quantity of his characteristics. So I guess we should say something more like his love is abundant or his mercy is abundant would really be better ways of saying that. So I understand that causes confusion. Christians should, be more careful with our words about some of these things. But no, talking as God is infinite doesn't destroy the Kalam argument, I don't think. Now the next one is the Thomist, or the Thomist. Sorry, screwed up that word. The Thomist Cosmological Argument. So in the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas, very influential theologian, he gave three forms of the cosmological argument in his Summa Theologica that as a part of his 5 ways of proving the existence of God. Aquinas says, quote, "Since nature works for a determinate end under the direction of a higher agent, whatever is done by nature must be traced back to God as to its first cause. So also, whatever is done voluntarily must be also traced back to some higher cause other than human reason or will, since these can change and fail. For all things that are changeable and capable of defect must be traced back to an immovable and self-necessary first principle." That's what Aquinas said. Aquinas first tried to demonstrate God's existence from motion. Motion is an effect, so it must need a cause. According to Aquinas, he said whatever is moved must be moved by another. But again, this is something that cannot regress forever. There must have been something that set all things in motion, or an unmoved mover. Although everything may be fully capable of functioning without a first, or capable of functioning without a first uncaused cause to initiate the action, everything would remain, idle and useless. Without the unmoved mover, to give an example, to open the lid, the universe would be like a wound music box that stayed closed, motionless and silent. To suggest that the music box needs no unmoved mover to open the lid is to suggest that the wood and metal assemble themselves into the music box without a craftsman. And the unmoved mover is what we call God. Aquinas' second proof is, rather than being based in motion, is based on what he calls efficient cause. Everything in existence owes its existence to something else. Nothing causes itself. Existence as an effect of a cause that is itself an effect of a cause, and so on. But again, this cannot be infinite. There must be a first cause to explain why any cause exists. And this cause must be self-existent that does not rely on anything else for its existence. And we call this being God. Aquinas' third argument is based on the possibility of existence. So think about it this way. Nothing in the universe has to exist. Everything just as well could have not existed. This makes everything possible, but not necessary. But something does exist. Aquinas says, quote, "Therefore, not all being merely possible, but there must exist something the existence of which is necessary." So a necessary being must exist in order to account for the possible beings that do exist. And this is God. God is the necessary being. The Leibnizian cosmological argument, it comes from the philosopher G.W.F. von Leibniz. And he argued that there must be a sufficient reason for the existence of the universe. So, if you have the idea that there was a cause, this argument is supposed to address the why behind the cause. The idea is that causes do not happen without reason. And like how everything has a prior cause, Leibniz observed that everything that exists has a reason outside of and prior to its existence. But again, you can't have an infinite chain of reason, just like you can't have an infinite chain of causes. The universe itself cannot provide a sufficient explanation for its own existence or its state of affairs, even. But the sufficient reason can be found outside the universe in a being whose existence is self-explanatory and logically necessary. And we call this being God. So we have all the philosophical groundwork to then get into things like scientific arguments. And probably the most well-known and the best well-known of these arguments is the Big Bang. And there are a number of examples of, various arguments that we see happen in the real world, and the second law of thermodynamics is an example of that. But again, the most well known and probably the most easily understood one is the Big Bang. So in the 1920s, an astronomer by the name of Edwin Hubble discovered our universe was bigger than previously thought. And Hubble was the first to recognize that we were just one of billions of galaxies. He studied light from distant galaxies and found it was not what he expected it to look like. The light he saw did not correspond to any known element or combination of elements. He noticed that the light was uniformly shifted to the red side of the spectrum. All the characteristics he expected were there, just at a slightly different location on the color spectrum, the red end. And this became known as the red shift. And Hubble found the explanation for this in what's called the Doppler effect. Now, the Doppler effect says that if sound is emitted from an object moving toward you, the sound waves are compressed or shortened. The shortening of the wavelength increases the pitch of the sound. It is shifted into a relatively higher place on the register. The farther away the object is as it moves toward you, the shorter the wavelength and the higher the pitch. The object moving away, sound waves, are lengthened, which decreases the pitch, the sound to a lower spot on the register. The Doppler effect describes the change in pitch when you hear like sirens from an ambulance. You know, when it moves towards you, it drops to a natural pitch. When it gets next to you, at a natural pitch, and further away, it drops lower than the natural pitch. And the Doppler effect can be applied to light waves, which is what Hubble did. The blue end of the light spectrum is composed of shorter wavelengths. Red is longer wavelengths. Everywhere looks in the universe, or everywhere he looked in the universe, he saw a red shift in the light. This meant that the stars were moving away from each other, which leads to the idea that the universe is expanding. And other people began to build on this idea. If it is expanding, then it must have had a point of origin. And then other discoveries proved that the expansion is lower than when it first began. Kind of like an explosion. And this became known as the Big Bang. Now, there are two primary objections to the Big Bang theory, and they're the steady state and the oscillating theories. The steady state theory argues that the universe always existed and always will exist. But the observation of the Big Bang argues against this. It would also require the existence of actual infinites, which they don't exist. The fact that there is a now makes the theory of an infinite, number of preceding moments an impossibility. The oscillating theory says that the universe will eventually stop expanding and it will contract back to a singularity, which will then explode and continue a cycle that will repeat forever. I actually remember my dad was talking about this one time, and I didn't really know how to respond because I had never heard about it before. But now I know the answer is that this theory would also require actual infinites. But since we exist in current oscillation, there must be a start to the cycle. I also think that the second law of thermodynamics argues against this view. The energy in the universe is not infinite. Balls bounce lower and faster with each bounce until it stops. But an oscillating universe would eventually run down. So even in an oscillating universe, you must have a beginning. So even if you do think that sort of the universe which we're now in is sort of just another one, like the singularity that brought the universe, that's just one of many, you still don't escape the fact of that cycle must have had a beginning, and that cycle will end eventually, even if you subscribe to something like an oscillating theory. But the Big Bang is the best explanation for the current state of the universe. But if it was sort of like an explosion, why did it explode? And what exploded? And where did it come from? Explosions are effects that thus need a cause. They don't cause themselves. The cause of the Big Bang can't be found in the physical universe because that's precisely what exploded. Also, the matter in the universe did not create itself, and the non-existence of actual infinites proves that the matter can't be eternal. Because the universe had a beginning, something must have initiated it. The cause of the universe must be found outside of it, and it must be transcendent. The cause must be powerful to create the entire universe out of nothing. The cause must not be an effect, otherwise we fall into the, absurd chain of the infinite regress. And this cause must not rely on anything else for its existence. It must be what we call necessary. So this describes what is necessary for the Big Bang to work. But if there is such an entity, it is still not a sufficient, what we call a sufficient reason for the creation of the universe. just because the entity does exist doesn't mean the universe must exist. We need a will to make it happen. A will, you know, how to explain it another way. A desire, a will. Yeah, I guess a will is the best way to explain it. And to illustrate what I'm trying to say is, let's say you have a car that has a working engine, has a healthy battery, it's properly connected to the electrical system to start the engine, and it's full of gas, and it has all the necessary conditions for moving, for going. But if you look at parking lots, they have cars that have the necessary conditions, but they're not moving. So they have necessary conditions, but they don't have sufficient conditions. Cars that move have necessary and sufficient conditions for moving, and that's why they are moving. What the moving car has and what the parked cars don't are drivers. It is a being that's not part of the car, has the power to start the car, does not rely on the car for its existence. It does not rely on anything outside itself to be able to operate the car, and also has the will to start and direct the car. And if they were really clever, they may have even built the car. So the universe needs an intelligent agent that is capable of choosing whether to create the universe or not. So this necessary and sufficient cause of the universe is God, I believe. So to sort of wrap all this up, these arguments, they have a long history, and they have been employed effectively amongst different religions. This argument is not to show all of the attributes or characteristics of God, really only that he exists. So it doesn't show what religion is true. It does expose several religions and worldviews being incompatible with the features of the universe that this argument brings to light. For example, a lot of the Eastern religions are not really compatible with the cosmological arguments, so you could say they could be dismissed sort of outright because of these arguments. But we're going to really examine on that later, but Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are all compatible with all of these cosmological arguments. So this argument is not to necessarily show you what religion is correct, just that there is a God, he does exist, he's powerful, he's intelligent, he has a will, he's transcendent, he's not trapped in the universe, he's outside it, apart from it, but still involved. So yeah, we're gonna get into some of those other things in a later video, but the next video I'm gonna make is again an argument for God's existence, which is similar to this argument, but it's a little different. It'll be about the design argument, or what is sometimes called the teleological argument, which I think is very interesting. I think this is interesting, and a lot of the other arguments we're going to get into I think are very interesting. And so yeah, this is kind of just to wrap up. And if you like any of this stuff, you can subscribe and like this and comment this and share this or whatever, or don't. That's totally your choice to do whatever you want to do. We live in a free country, so do whatever you want to do. But yeah, so yeah, I'm excited for this. I think it's going to be really cool, and I really hope that people will use this just as a resource, and they see it more than just, winning an argument, but rather understanding that belief in God, and eventually we'll get to Christianity and believing in Jesus, that these things, at times they may seem, not logical and not reasonable, but in reality, I think it's the most reasonable choice to make to give your life to Christ. I really think that is the most reasonable thing to do. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that eventually on why I think that. So I will see you guys later, and hey, praise God for the snow. Us down in Georgia, we don't get snow often, but we got snow this time, which is pretty cool. And yeah, so shout out to all the other Southerners who saw snow, who probably won't see snow for another decade or so. But I will see y'all guys probably tomorrow. I'm thinking sometime tomorrow. So yeah, keep a lookout for the next video, and check out some of my other videos that I've made. Just see if they are of any benefit to you, and I will catch you guys later.